Even many conservatives shy away from naming the enemy, Mr. Spencer writes, for fear that it means war against 1 billion Muslims. But if Mr. Spencer's arguments are granted, doesn't it? It's a PC myth, he has written, in the context of a discussion not of fringe terrorists, but of mainstream Islam and Islamic history, that we can negotiate with these people, quote unquote. There's scarcely a single ray of light in Mr. Spencer's relentlessly negative portrayal of Islam and Islamic civilization, which seem beyond redemption, and which, it appears, must be utterly repudiated. Accordingly, for example, Muslim Spain and the Ottoman Empire, widely recognized by mainstream scholars as relatively tolerant places compared with then contemporary Europe, weren't tolerant at all. Islamic law, lie, steal, and kill, reads one of his chapter headings. He even denigrates Muslim contributions to science and philosophy. It is thus stunningly ironic to read Mr. Spencer's lament that, quote, Islamic theology so devalues non-believers that there's no room in Islamic culture for any generosity toward their achievements, end quote. There seems no place at all in Mr. Spencer's world for believing Muslims. As long as men read and believe the Quran, Mr. Spencer writes in his politically incorrect guide, women will be despised second-class citizens, subject to the loss of virtually all of the most basic human freedoms. The war on terror, he declares in the opening sentence of his book Religion of Peace, is an ideological conflict, one in which Christians, Jews, Buddhists, Hindus, atheists, secular Muslims, and others have a stake. Notice that while secular Muslims are included as potential allies, believing Muslims are conspicuously omitted. And now a few points of many. The Quran says Mr. Spencer exhorts believers to fight unbelievers. The commands taken at face value are open-ended and universal. However, it's just as possible to take them as exhortations to fight specific hostile unbelievers in Arabia in the early 7th century, neither open-ended nor universal. It's essential to know the context of Quranic verses, what Muslims call the asbab an-nuzul, the reasons for sending down or occasions of revelation. Mr. Spencer puts aggressive military jihad at the absolute heart of Islam, suggesting that doing otherwise is untrue to the classical texts. But the 8th century jurist Ibn Jurayj regarded prayer and mosque attendance as more important and did not consider jihad obligatory for all. Al-Bukhari, Muslim, and At-Tirmidhi report a saying of Muhammad indicating that helping widows and the poor is jihad. Another report has Muhammad telling a man to go home and care for his parents rather than going out to fight. The early jurist Sufyan al-Thawri believed that jihad was primarily defensive and that only defensive jihad was obligatory upon individual Muslims. So did the prominent 20th century rector of Al-Azhar University in Cairo, Muhammad Shaltut. Mr. Spencer says that the Quranic phrase jihad fi sabilillah, striving in the path of God, means armed struggle to establish the hegemony of the Islamic social order. This is, to say the least of it, debatable. The Arabic word jihad means simply striving. The Musannaf of Abd al-Razak in the 9th century, for instance, in addition to the military defense of Islamic lands, offers striving daily to live righteously through acts of worship as a specimen of jihad, along with earning a legal livelihood and serving one's family. Other early sources mention the pursuit of knowledge, spending money on a good cause, prayer, giving alms, and even patience or patient endurance as examples of non-military jihad. Curiously, the word harb, or war, is never conjoined with the term jihad in the Quran. Mr. Spencer writes of Muhammad's alleged ambitions of world domination. However, modern scholars like Montgomery Watt and Karl Ernst reject them as later retrojections from the imperial period. Even if the voices of moderation are rare, muted, and too often in exile, which I grant, there's a genuine discussion going on within Islam. John Kelsey's Arguing the Just War in Islam, Karl Ernst's Following Muhammad, Rethinking Islam in the Contemporary World, are two recent books that chronicle portions of that discussion. The essays gathered in Charles Kurtzman's sourcebook entitled Liberal Islam and Asmas Faruddin's admirable new book, The First Muslims, History and Memory, are illustrations of it. Scholars like Ghulam Ahmed, Abdulaziz Sachedina, the late Fazlur Rahman, UCLA's Khalid Abul Fadl figure in it. Ali Abdul Razik argued that no particular form of government is required by Islam, that a social order compatible with Islam simply requires justice and equity. There's considerable debate about the reliability of the hadith, which have been used to justify jihadi violence. The contemporary Iranian philosopher Abdul Karim Soroush argues for the legitimacy of religious pluralism, and in North Africa, Muhammad Talbi contends Islamically for religious liberty. We should be careful not to undercut such people, nor to award the victor's crown to their opponents. They have a difficult enough challenge as it is. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're fortunate enough to have Robert Spencer himself to respond to some of the accusations and some of the statements Dr. Peterson made. I also want to point out that Robert Spencer will be available to the public at a book signing after this, 4:15, booth 415. And without further ado, the director of the Jihad Watch, which is a news and commentary site that's updated daily, Robert Spencer.
Thank you. So many things to say in so little time. The question is whether to speak about the elements of Islam that are used by jihadists to justify violence and supremacism and oppression in various ways is to validate those interpretations of Islam and to undercut those Muslims who are trying to reform those things. This is a very important question, and I don't think that it can be approached unless we have an accurate understanding of the facts on the ground. Dr. Peterson quite correctly stated at the beginning of his talk that there is no single Islam, that there is in the first place the Sunni and Shiite divide, and in the second place 4 schools of Sunni jurisprudence, as well as other schools of jurisprudence. He did not mention, however, that there is a broad consensus, and consensus is a very important, ijma is a very important concept in Islamic theology. Muhammad prophesied that his community would not agree on an error. And so what is reached as a point of consensus by the various schools of Islamic law is considered to be a question that is settled and sure. Now, this is Islamic theology. This is not my opinion. These are matters of record that the schools of Islamic jurisprudence do agree and have a consensus on the necessity to wage war against unbelievers. Dr. Peterson mentioned the 4 schools of Sunni jurisprudence, the Shafi'i, Maliki, Hanafi, and Hanbali. All of them agree that jihad is a precept of divine institution, that it is preferable to first invite the non-Muslims to accept Islam, and if they refuse, to fight them. I am quoting in part the words of Ibn Abi Zayd al-Qayrawani, who is a Maliki jurist, the jurist from one of these schools of jurisprudence. And Qayrawani was actually working from the words of Muhammad himself as recorded in the Hadith collection Sahih Muslim, when he said to meet the unbelievers, invite them to accept Islam. If they refuse, invite them to enter the Islamic social order as the dhimmis, the second-class citizens, as mandated by Islamic law in an institutionalized status of discrimination. They would not enjoy equality of rights under the law with the Muslims, and if they refuse both, to go to war with them. Conversion, subjugation, or war being set out by Muhammad in what are considered to be canonical hadith that are authentic by all the schools of Islamic law and all the orthodox sects of Islam. Now, a lot of the confusion comes from the difficulty of dealing with these facts. This is not to say that no modern reformers exist. It is to say that it is an element of traditional and mainstream Islam and a point of agreement among the various differing sects of Islam that warfare against unbelievers and their subjugation under the rule of Islamic law is part of the responsibility of the Muslim community. Now, he says that if this is true, Dr. Peterson says that this would be very disheartening. Unfortunately, there are some truths that are disheartening. And what we have to do is realistically work from that point to try to come up with some kind of a solution that is actually workable, rather than retreat into fantasies, half-truths, and deceptions that are much more comforting, much more heartening, but unfortunately false.